Doing a great interview is pretty straightforward when you have a fantastic guest. That's definitely the case here. My goal is to step back and let my guests take the spotlight. Honestly, a good interview really comes down to the interview being able to communicate their message clearly, and just I try to make sure that I'm not getting in the way, keeping things comfortable for them. It's always an honor to talk with people who have so much experience, especially in the world of design. I love it because I end up learning a lot, but at the same time, I always feel a little vulnerable. Like, am I even asking the right questions? Sometimes I wonder how I even have the nerve to do it, but in the end, it's all about taking the leap and just going for it. Today's guest is Cameron Tonkinwise. He's a design professor in Sydney University of Technology. He's an expert in design studies and a leading voice in the field of transition design. In this interview, we talked about the opportunities in the public sector and universities in driving creative futures, about energy transitions, and in designing for less material-intense society. We also talk about his new book and the magic of design. My name is Mariana Salgado. This is Diseño y Diáspora.
My name's Cameron Tonkinwise. I'm currently the Professor of Design Studies at the University of Technology, Sydney, but I've had the privilege of teaching in a couple of institutions in North America, for example, and now I'm based only in Sydney, Australia, which is, I should indicate, it's the land of the Gadigal people, so I am on unceded land and pay my respects to elders past and present. I studied philosophy more or less a long time ago, so in the late 80s, early 90s, which was when everybody was talking about post-structuralism. I spent a lot of time studying the work of, for example, Jacques Derrida, and then I wrote my PhD around Martin Heidegger, who is a Nazi. Out of that, I started working with a guy called Tony Fry, who is a design theorist, and he was establishing an organization called the Eco-Design Foundation.
Yes, I have been reading his work. His work is very political. I liked a lot.
It is. It's almost political philosophy. It's never an easy read. And I think what's interesting about him is that he very deliberately has forceful understandings of both the agency of design and the nature of how much trouble our civilizations are in at the moment in terms of sustainability, and tries to put the first to dealing with the second. But his demands are excessive at times and difficult. But I think it's really important that someone is out there saying that.
Definitely, I agree. And we can go a little bit back, and you can tell me what were you researching before, and then we go to what you are doing now. Would that be a good thing? Because I'm super eager to listen a little bit at least on your research on designing transition.
Yeah, as I said, I was working with Tony Fry. And he was a very early mover in the sustainable design, eco-design world in the 90s. So I was doing a lot of research in sustainable design, but we were always interested not just in reducing harm, but in using design to create new types of ways of living. So very early on in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, I was spending a lot of time thinking about what was called in those days dematerialization. I think these days it's called degrowth, but it's about reducing materials intensity. So using less stuff, owning less stuff, having less stuff passing through households and societies. So I was doing a lot of work on that, which sort of introduced me to service design. And then when I moved across to the United States, social media had started and people were using those kind of digital connections to think about sharing economies. So that was sort of moving dematerialization to sharing economies. And I say all of that because the focus was on how do you do bigger scale change as a designer? How do you design human scale interactions, but in ways that will enable systems change, social systems change? So I've always been thinking about those sorts of things. And then when I had a chance to teach at Carnegie Mellon University with Terry Irwin and Gideon Kossoff, we started calling human scale enabled change to systems. We started calling that transition design. So we were thinking about the kinds of things that we thought designers needed to be better educated in so that they could be agents of change, and not just reform change, but actual structural change to our society. So I've been doing sort of work on transition design since working with them, and then coming back in Australia, a lot of my work has been sort of energy transition related, and continues to be, and then also sort of climate change, so mitigating and adapting to natural disasters and things like that. So that's very much on the applied side, and then sort of in the background, I'm always trying to think about the nature of design. What is design? Sort of doing design philosophy, philosophizing about design, to always ask the question like, is design adequate to the scale and type of change that we need to create right now?
And what's the answer? Do you have a certain answer? Is adequate?
Yes, it definitely is adequate, but not in the way that it's currently understood. So it's this very weird situation in which I remember working with Bruce Nussbaum when I first arrived in New York, and he wrote this rude little opinion piece in which he said, designers are the enemy of design. And he kind of said, the problem is that the designers are so determined to sort of restrict the focus of their practice that they are not doing justice to their actual power. And I would put it even in more rudely. I think a lot of designers are scared to admit how responsible they actually are for all the things they design and the consequences that they sort of lead to. And so I think the answer is yes. Within designing, there are ways of actually changing societies, but most designers will refuse that or just claim, well, if it is there, no one's going to let us do it. Clients don't want it. Customers don't want it. Capitalism doesn't want it. And then they just don't do it. Yeah. So the answer is kind of yes, but no.
But this is why you devote yourself to teach designers?
It is. It's absolutely. But again, that's always difficult because if you're just starting out design, you've got a very particular picture of what design is in your head. It's normally the least interesting, I think, version of design. So you sort of encounter first-year design students and you're trying to very quickly expose them to other agencies and responsibilities of design. But they will often not want to hear that. They'll want to know that you can skill them in something they've come to university to study, for example, and you're telling them, no, there's so much more. And so only a small percentage, I think, in the end really take to that message.
But I guess to convince designers and to mold them, you use theory, but you also use specific cases, right? Or projects in which you work. Could you give me one example of a case that you show them or you have been involved with them in which you could kind of try to shift the idea of design?
So I'll give two examples. Maybe one is not work that I was doing, though it was the work of people who I was working with at Parsons, the New School for Design in New York when I was there. So work that Lara Pennon and the Parsons DESIS lab does there. And That will be moments. So when I was there when Lara first came in the early 2010s, there was this kind of moment at which designers were finally being hired by local governments. So the mayor's office, for example, in the city of New York, to actually start thinking about services that would help people live differently. So it would actually look at particular underutilized resources. This was a formula that Ezio Manzini used to use. You look at unmet need, underutilized resources, and then designers put those together. And in that way, you're using many different types of designing. It might be a product, a tool, kit. It might be service design. It might be a strategic design. But what you're enabling people to do is to live quite differently in the city because the designer has found some underutilized resources, which might be something like a public library and the kind of services that a public library is offering, and recognize that it's not just in how we currently understand and frame library services in terms of books and information, but you suddenly realize that these are, for example, in work that I've been doing here, they're also cooling centres as we start to face increasing temperatures in hot cities. So a library all of a sudden is an underutilised resource as a cooling centre in terms of these new unmet needs, in terms of how people are going to cope with climate change. And a designer will actually see this as not just an opportunity, so not just say, okay, well, it's fairly easy. Let's have a policy, open the doors when it's above 100 Fahrenheit or 40 degrees centigrade, let people in, encourage them, let them sit and eat. But actually recognizing, okay, well, if people start to come into a public setting like that in these situations, we can do many more things with them. We can offer them other types of services. We can build new types of social relations. We can service design that experience so that it's actually a transition point. It's a type of change. It's not just meeting one need. It's more like Manfred Max Neef described, synergic satisfiers. They satisfy many needs. And you start to design them so that they can do that. And all of a sudden, you're starting to realize that you're not just a service designer or a public policy designer or an interior designer. You're engaged in design at a relational level that can bring about change over time, because you're focusing not just on solving one problem, but solving many problems.
But this relates to these designing participations, no? Like designing how different actors come into play when we are talking about, for example, city library services. Did I understand?
Yep, absolutely.
Right?
So it has to be a type of co-design, and it is very much, design for social innovation coming out of a kind of participatory design ethic. I think the difference might be between, let's say, design for social innovation and unmet needs. And what I'm talking about in terms of transition design is that you're working with people, but not only on their currently articulated needs. So this starts to get kind of politically difficult, but you're not just simply trying to, as I said, give them a cool space to be in and perhaps, some other essentials. You're actually trying to use the gathering as a way to open them up to new worlds, new ways of living, and that will need to be designed. And you'll be offering things to them that they haven't necessarily asked for. So it's not just co-design based on current imperatives. It's co-design towards transition. You're trying to create new rituals, new social relations, new social practices. So I think that would be how I'd articulate the difference. It's always got to be participatory. It can never be impositional in a kind of modernist way, but it is has an ambition toward change rather than just current satisfaction. And I think, so if I give you a second example, the second example is just work I'm doing at the moment on energy transitions and when households start to be not just consumers of energy, but actually generators of electricity, because they might have photovoltaics on the roof. They're storers of electricity because they might have batteries, literally a lithium-ion battery, but it could be a hot water tank. They heat the water during the day and then have a hot water battery, or they pre-cool the house if it's hot. They have a well-insulated house and they use daytime electricity when it's surplus to, for free, heat the house. So they store energy, and then they might also distribute energy. They make decisions about when they want to release the energy from their house. They reduce their own consumption so that it can be sent to a community, to a local school. There's all these new energy practices coming now. All of that is going to depend on interaction designers, device designers creating the platforms through which households and communities are making those decisions about how they use energy. Now, at the moment, so there's a need. There's a market need. People are putting photovoltaics on their roof. They've been told it's a good thing to do for the energy transition, to be a more sustainable society, to decarbonise. They're doing that. And then people have recognised, okay, well, there's surplus power. What are they going to do with it? It's even starting to mess with the electricity grid a bit. But the way it's being designed at the moment, if you only have a restricted framework, it's being designed purely in terms of cost benefit. When is electricity cheap? When is it expensive? How can you make money moving it? You know, it's all like kilowatt hours and dollars, and it's charts and dials. You can just imagine what these apps look like. Whereas, in fact, if you think about participatory transition design, you could go in and say, we could live in a very different society that has moments of energy abundance in which people are making decisions about sharing energy because they're producing energy off their roofs more than they need it in the middle of the day. So this becomes a really interesting situation. And the app for that, the experience of how you would decide to share power, you would not want that to look like dials and kilowatts and dollars. You'd want it to look really different, very tangible interaction, social interaction. And if you did that, if you made a sort of a device that allowed you to share energy, you'd actually be opening up societies to very different ways of living. They would no longer be just competitive neoliberal houses just trying to isolate themselves from energy costs. They would now be collaborating differently if a designer is participating in the creation of how that practice materializes in terms of an interface. So again, I think the secret to this kind of transition designing is to always design for now, but with a view to larger scale social change. And so, to go right back to your first question, if you have first year designers who just want to be interaction designers or product designers, you're saying to them, you can be that, you should be that, but always with a view to also enabling wider systems change, wider social change. And that is possible. You have to argue for it. It's hard. People don't want it because you're going to be putting power companies out of money. But it is possible if designers are political.
Definitely. But did you have a certain project on this energy, new practices in energy, in which you could kind of change the experience of sharing power?
Yeah. So we have a couple of energy company partners who are trying to explore some of this. It's still very early days. They're very nervous. So now that's been put into a much larger project being run by colleagues at Monash University. It's going to be looking at future living scenarios of energy practices. We're going to be sort of concretizing these propositions as part of a research project because we're trying to lead market players, energy market players in this direction. They aren't confident enough or risk averse enough to head in that direction. They're too risk averse to head in that direction. So it's a perfect moment at which you use university-based designing to try and change the ecosystem and open people up to other options.
Well, I have never heard about this university-based designing as a concept. So yes, it's true that in the university you can do more pioneering work and try out new things that you cannot in the industry, definitely. But you are doing that in collaboration with the industry, right?
Some of it is being done in collaboration, but exactly your point. universities are they're losing it, but they're still very special ecosystems in global north societies, if I can just restrict my analysis to that. So within a global north society, you have the market and you have sort of households and you have government. You do have this weird entity called universities, and they're mostly about training people to be good workers so that they can make money. But they're also spaces in which people are trying to think about what we should be doing and what we need to know to do what we'd like to do. And it's really important, I think, that universities be much more assertive about being the creators of alternative futures and concretizing them, not just putting them in a report, but that's why you need design research, actually concretizing them and showing people, showing society, other pathways are open to us. The one that we are heading down in a kind of post-neoliberal, completely partisan, increasingly fascistic world is not the one we have to go down. Like, we have these other pathways and they can be concretized. You can imagine yourself living in them. You can imagine this type of transport or this type of food system or these types of communal living or these types of degrowth. They're all able to be concretized if researchers research them and discover that they're interesting and more sustainable and equitable, and if designers concretize them. So I think a lot of this work, we do it with partners, but we don't do it for partners. We do it to learn and see the limits, and then to put the propositions out there so that they can stretch and change what it is that the market actually wants and is prepared to do.
Great. And now maybe we can shift to your book. What are you writing about now? Is it in connection with what you were talking about?
So it is a little bit, as I said to you before, I began in kind of philosophy, and I've always tried to, whenever I'm doing a project, I'm always trying to think, how might this project change our understanding of design, or how might a changed understanding of design impact this project? So while I've been sort of sometimes writing about project work, a lot of the time, particularly when I'm writing at a more formal level, I'm trying to sort of think through what it actually means that humans are people who live in diverse cultures with and through things, with and through designed things, that we are designed monsters. I think Bruno Latour kind of called it, insofar as we're kind of always fusing our being with the things we make, and we remake ourselves by making these things. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about those. They're all quite obscure academic articles, and I'm trying to sort of rewrite them now as a sustained philosophy of design. I'm not sure I'm going to get there. But the connection is, for example, if we are going to, let's go right back to the stuff I used to do. If we're going to be a less materials intense society, if we're going to have less stuff. So at some point, there was a very nice European initiative called Factor 10, and it said that if you live in the global north, you should live with 1/10 of the number of things that you currently use. So 1/10 of the possessions and 1/10 of the number of things moving through your house, packaging and products that short lifespan and things like that. So it's a nice exercise. It was called the Factor 10 Club, and just to sit there thinking. Now, if I'm thinking about that, obviously I need to have some way of understanding the role of things in my life, the role of things in how I am, so that I can make those choices about the ones I need access to but don't need to own, the ones I need to have permanently on and close by, the ones that need to stay the same in form versus the ones that need to change. So if I'm going to make those sorts of decisions about living a Factor 10 life, I really need to have a better understanding of why things are the way they are. Why do we design things? Why do we make objects and why do we make objects have the forms and qualities that we do? So we sort of need a philosophic account of designed artifacts so that we can begin to renegotiate our relation to those designed artifacts. So,
and we negotiate, you mean negotiating with yourself when you are designing and defining what is design?
Yourself as a designer, yourself as a non-designer who's just using designed artifacts. I think one of the, every book on design begins with this line, everything you are currently looking at has been designed by somebody. Someone somewhere made a decision about the shape of the bevel on the side of your computer or the color of your headphones or the weave of the fabric. Someone's made a decision about everything. And so everyone always says that. I think that the other side of that is what people need to pause and think about, which is how is it that we live, most people who are not designers, how is it that we live with all these things that have been designed and yet never think about the fact that they were designed? Why is it such a minor discipline? Why is it still something that most people don't talk about or pay attention to? How is it that we can live in a society in which we so little understand the things that we depend upon? So again, I think you have to sort of start to say it's weird that we live without understanding how we live. It's weird that we live with designed things without understanding design. So it's not just that everything's designed, it's that we also don't pay any attention to the fact that they're designed. And so we don't have any good criteria for judging them. And then we get, for example, surprised when they break down. I think, I'm sort of, sorry, it's a bit of a tangent, but I'm quite critical of people who criticize planned obsolescence. So planned obsolescence suggests that we're all just subject to this big conspiracy, that capitalists are out there just making sure everything lasts a short amount of time as possible. I've never met a designer working for a product design firm who can confirm that they've actually had a conversation in which a product manager or a CEO has come to them and said, make it shorter life. That's not how it happens. So it's not planned obsolescence. It's systemic obsolescence. Obsolescence is the outcome of a whole bunch of design decisions that people are making in good faith, without sort of thinking about how can I just make a terrible experience for the consumer. And one of the things that happens is that as a consumer, you buy something not having thought at all about its design. And then one day it just breaks. And you didn't pay any attention to it while it worked. While it worked, and you used it. That's good design. Good design disappears, it withdraws. You use it, you go about, you do the activity. It's been a means in an ecosystem of social practices. And then all of a sudden it breaks. And at that point, you sort of rack your head and you think, when did I buy this? I only bought this 2 years ago. That's outrageous that it's broken. You have this whole kind of like, I can't believe it. And so you get angry and you blame capitalists, which is not entirely wrong, but it's the system rather than some particular individual. But the main reason is that there's this shock that something should break. We just don't expect things to break. So we still have this surprise. We still live in a way in which we think things should have object permanence, that they were kind of made. We treat them like a fetish object. We treat them like they came from nowhere and should live eternally. And then when they break, we're like, oh, must be a conspiracy. We call up, almost some religious
but
superstition.
We do the same when we are sick, right? I mean, with death, we have the same relationship. Like, oh, we are sick. What's wrong? When we know that that's part of the life, right?
That's a fantastic example. It's a great example. Exactly. That there's nothing more annoying than realizing that the body that you're supposedly driving around the planet is fragile and, it doesn't have a design and actually is just a bunch of interlinking systems that can eventually break down. No, that's a great point. So I think that's exactly what I'm trying to get to when I'm trying to think about these philosophies of design. Like, what are our ways of normally being with things that cause us to be surprised when they break, that cause us to not understand how to choose good things, that cause our society to be cluttered with things. I mean, that's another example that when you sort of have a moment before throwing everything out, or when you move house, you just suddenly look around and you think, how did I get, if you're a privileged person with money, you have this moment in which you think, how did I get all this stuff? Where did all this stuff come from? Why is it accumulated? Now, that puzzlement, we should work with that. We should think about that. How is it possible that things accumulate even though you're the one who made all the decisions to buy them and use them and stop using them and replace them? It shouldn't be a surprise.
But because odd. Of owning certain things is a question of identity, right? I mean, why do we have such big bookshelf full with books and we don't just give it away to the library each time that we read them? It's like, no, because first I believe I'm going to use all these books, which is not true, and we all know, but also because I want the others to know that I have read all these books.
Right. No, so I agree. But on the other hand, if you think about that argument about identity, it's weird to think I need the crux. I need the crutch. Sorry, I need the prop for my identity. If it really is about my identity, then it's me. Like, I've absorbed it. It's become who I am. So the argument is sort of right and wrong. It's this weird thing that identity is part of some of our purchases, but then those things exist as what we wish we were and are not. If it was truly inside me, if I would absorb the intelligence of the book and it was inside me, I don't need the book. I can just recall, I remember reading this book and it tells you this. It's in my identity. So the reason we have objects is because our identity is this mix of who I was, who I am, and who I wish I was. They're things I tell myself. Right, so a lot of the books that are around me here that you can't see at the moment, I don't show them to other people. No one comes into this area to look at the books. They're there to try and help me think, oh, that's who I am. Remember to be that person. Or remember when you used to be that person. So we are distributed entities. We are not individuals with identities. Or to put it another way, if it is identity, then I should get rid of all these things. Like, there should be this moment in which I think, no, I am who I am right now. So why do I have these past things? And indeed, we all go through these moments in which you look at your shelves or your wardrobe and think, there's a whole lot of not me in there. Oh, I'm not that person anymore. My goodness, imagine wearing that. I can't believe I ever used to be able to wear that out in public. Like, get rid of that. That's not me.
But also there is a lot of I wish to. So I have a lot of clothes that I wish at some moment I will fit again. And then I have a lot of books that I wish I have time to read. So I have this wish list implied in the things that surround me.
That's exactly right. It was beautifully pointed out in terms of fashion by Kate Fletcher. In really early work that she did, sustainable fashion design thinker, and she did really beautiful work on how much I don't do this, and it's nothing noble. It's kind of embarrassing that I don't have these ambitions about my dress. But some people will buy something thinking, at some point I will finally be invited to a cocktail party that will be relevant for that outfit. But in fact, they never get invited. I have an outfit that I'm going to wear on the red carpet when I finally get to be on the red carpet. But again, I mean, that's the point of this thinking. I mean, we need really sophisticated understandings of our material culture that sometimes exist in cultural studies, they sometimes exist in visual culture studies or object material culture studies. But designers get little bits and pieces of them, but they should really be the experts about material culture, visual culture, digital culture. Designers should be the holders of this discipline knowledge. But instead, they're just the makers of the things that sociologists and anthropologists then discover the meaning of. Whereas we designers should actually be the people who really carry and hold this knowledge.
Episode is part of the lists Educación en Diseño, Australia y Diseño, Reino Unido y Diseño, Diseño en transición, Diseño sostenible, Design in the public sector, and D&D in English. Sorry, I have lists in Spanish and others in English. This is because some of them were published from the beginning in Spanish and some in English. And because I want to keep this podcast as a bilingual one, or trilingual, because in fact sometimes we speak Portuguese, but I am exploring how to better classify episodes, learning how to do it. But if you are looking for content on a specific topic and you don't find it, you can always contact me. After this interview, we continued talking with Cameron and we decided to do some interviews together on design education for this podcast. We will see when do we publish this series. This is a topic that interests both of us. We have a series of 14 episodes on the topic coming soon that I have done alone. A bit long, this series. Why? Because there are a lot of design professors I wanted to talk with, and the excuse is always, let's make a podcast. Most of them work in the diaspora and not in Spanish-speaking countries, and all of them are Spanish speakers. I wanted to ask all of them what are we missing in design education today. We also did a panel on the topic with Jorge Frascara. The panel can be seen now already from our YouTube channel. Professors in general can explain very well what they are doing and are researching current emerging design practices. They are trained orally, they are good communicators. As one of the objectives of this podcast is long life learning, it is easy to think that designers that left the university still want, from time to time, listen to professors and design researchers. Let's now continue listening to Cameron, that he has much more to tell us. Yeah, you also research about this magical nature and of design. And I understand that your next book is going to tackle on this magical. And for me, I have to tell you, when I read the magical, I was like, oh no, I'm super skeptical about whatever that says that is magical. And then in a moment, you say that the magical nature is political. And this completely blew my mind. And I wanted you to be able to tell us more about these magical thoughts.
So thanks for asking about this. It's the thing that I almost consider most important, but never gets asked about because it's weird and I haven't formulated the argument well. But it's a little bit, so I have to sort of go back in time. When Europeans were colonizing other parts of the world, they encountered people who lived very different ways, who believed different things and who had different practices. And to the European colonizer, they looked at these people and they said, these people are all doing magical thinking. They think that if they do this thing over here, it's going to cause that thing over here. So to use a totally colonialist example, they do a rain dance and it causes the rain to come. Now that's magical thinking, we Westerners, we Europeans, we have gone through the Enlightenment. We know science and we know that that is not a causal relation. So whenever you talk about magic, if you're a European, it's embarrassing to talk about it because it's tied up in this colonialist history. And it's tied up in these sort of judgments that colonizers were making about the people they were colonizing and their belief systems, and just thinking, these people have primitive, so-called primitive belief systems. So part of the reason why I'm interested in saying that design is actually Western magic is to deal with this colonialist heritage and to try and say what we Westerners, because I'm white, what we Westerners judge other people as being merely magical, we are as magical as they, as we accuse them of being. We have the same kinds of beliefs of action at a distance, of being able to do A and cause B. We have these magical beliefs, and design is the primary agent for affecting those. If you came from another culture, and I think this is an example I use in the paper, which came from someone who was writing about magic. If you came from another culture and saw somebody get into a car and turn the key ignition, this tiny action, right, almost like being a magician's wand. You have this magic device, you put it in a key and you turn it, and all of a sudden it triggers a machine that will move you around the planet. You can suddenly move faster and more dangerously than anybody who has never been in an automobile. And it's all with this sort of key and these other magical devices for pressing pedals and steering. If you can just try and stop thinking about a culture that drives and imagine you come from a culture in which driving is not in the worldview, driving is this magical activity.
So this power of change is what makes design a form of magic.
Well, design conceals the causal changes that happen. They conceal the chain, right? So I don't have an engineering mind. I don't understand very well a combustion engine. So I, not really understanding that, can get into this giant device and have the interaction of pressing the pedal. I just simply press the accelerator and I can hear the engine start to make a noise and I can feel the force and the thing is pulling. It is the designer who has designed me not to be able to see the pedal's actual connection to the engine. It would be possible to make a car that was glass and you could see the cable connection. These days it's all done by wire, digital, but if it was literally like the accelerator with the cable connection and I can see the engine and I can hear the engine, I can see it going faster. It is the designer who connects these things and conceals these things and seals these things, seals them into a thing called a car, some magical combination of things, so that I never have to think about it. So I never think about it. I just get mobility. I can just suddenly drive. So there's a way in which I need to recognize that designers are performing a magical act in that they've taken one action A over here and it's led to this outcome B over there. And it's not conceptually, philosophically different from thinking if I do a rain dance here, it will lead to rain there. And if you're a Westerner studying other cultures, sometimes you will do an analysis and say, well, the rain dance comes at a particular point in the season, it comes at a particular years, it's done by a particular person who's paying attention to things. There will be a reason in Western logic why the rain dance does in fact have an association with the rain. That is no different from than me saying there are all these interactions, you and I speaking right now, either sides of the planet, talking as if we're in the same room, because designers have made interfaces that have turned zeros and ones going through fiber optics on the bottom of the ocean and turning them into sound levels that are also going to be picked up by some other system and turned into a transcript. Like this is magic. It's not magic in that we call it technology.
Yeah, but why do you say that design as magical is decolonial?
Because if I can begin to recognize that the essence of being a Western, modern, global consumer class person, which is designed goods, designed systems, designed consumption, we Westerners, white people like me, I am white by design. It's also the fact that design is a very white discipline, just in terms of ethnic presentation, at least until recently. But design is, whiteness is a society that has been designed and is full of designed artifacts compared to others, often through exclusion. So design is the essence of what I am as a Westerner, but it appears to be different from what colonized people, indigenous people, people of color around the world, the way they live. There are arguments that there are other types of designers. Alfredo Gutierrez calls it decibels, this kind of weird word to kind of say there are designs that shouldn't be called design because design is such a Western word. So they live differently. I live according to design. They live those ways. Colonized people live in other worlds. My Westernness is as magical as what I accuse their systems of being. I am beginning to loosen the bonds of my own whiteness, my own Westernness. Part of decolonization is ceding ground and letting people with other voices, other histories, other backgrounds, other worlds speak. But to do that, we white people like me need to loosen the coloniality that is programmed into my way of thinking. And for me, design is one of those switch points. Design is, in some ways, though it is the essence of being Western, it is the least Western thing about Westerners. Because it's this weird synthesis, cultural, material practice. Designers are the people who make something from nothing. Designers are people who can change society by creating new practices. There are technologies, engineers, we understand that. But the people who get those technologies into households so that people live differently, those are designers. Designers are the magicians of the West. And they allow the West to pretend like it's not being magical in the same way as these other societies that they have judged to be magical because of their colonialist history. Design is the religion of the West. It makes these religious artifacts. It makes these things that people will starve themselves to get.
So in a way, to call ourselves magicians or sorcerers is a way to laugh at ourselves also.
Though I think laughing often means you return to where you were. Like laughing is the pleasure of being outside and then coming back to yourself. So I would say it's not so much laughing as literally undermining, because I think I'm just being so traditionally sort of careful, doing my research, talking to clients and customers, coming up with interfaces. I think I'm being very stable. When I admit that there's some magic going on in what I'm doing, I'm admitting I don't really understand my own profession. And I'm admitting that I am using powers I'm not really taking responsibility for because I've never actually really understood them. That it's, to be a designer is to be a wizard who hasn't been given training. You're really dangerous. You're really dangerous. So, we can laugh at it, but we also need to sort of just also step back and think, actually, we need to regulate this thing. We need to unionize this thing. We need to limit this thing. We need to make sure that people are responsible for what they do. If you're going to do some magic, you have to suffer that magic as well. Like if you're going to put other people under a spell, you should be under that spell. You don't just get to design things for other people. You have to use the stuff you design. Suddenly you're in a position of saying we should really treat this core aspect of Westernness differently.
Well, I guess I am laughing because I acknowledge the new position you are presenting, right? And it's like taking me out of the seriousness of my profession.
It is. I mean, the dangerous side to it is that it looks like I'm re-mysticizing it. You know, there are plenty of modernist design gurus who just are like, it's all magic, don't worry, let the expert in the studio. It's the exact opposite argument I'm trying to make here, that all magic is a sort of collective belief system. You know, if you go and see a magician, it's not just that they are doing it, it's that you are letting them do it. Like if you go to a hypnotist, particularly a theatrical hypnotist, it's fairly clear everyone is actually just permitting themselves to be hypnotized. No one is actually being hypnotized. Everyone is just letting themselves believe that magic is happening. And that's the same as me sitting at my desk, letting myself believe the desk is not going to collapse and that the computer is going to work and we're going to speak to someone on the other side of the planet. Like I am participating in the magic. It's not giving more individual power to these design gurus. It's instead saying we are all holding this magicness in place.
Now, what are the things that you are inspired nowadays? What are you reading, listening, watching that you would like to recommend in relation to these things that we were talking?
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time in the recent past reading the work of François Jullien, who's a French sinologist. So he's a French philosopher trying to understand the sameness and difference of ancient Greece as the kind of beginning of Westernness and ancient China, particularly sort of Taoist philosophy. And he just thinks very carefully about comparative philosophy in that way. And a lot of his early work, I think, is design relevant. He was particularly interested in ideas of efficacy. He wrote a book called The Propensity of Things. Bruno Latour, the philosopher of technology, was particularly interested in that early book. So because François Jullien sort of begins from a position of thinking ancient Chinese thought is ontologically different from Western thinking, but they can speak even though they're different, I find that work really powerful to think in an era of pluriverse, to think in an era of coexisting ontologies that are incompatible. He has a way of connecting those. And then the kinds of ideas he draws out, I think, are just actually really important in wider significance. So he wrote a book on aging. I'm doing some work at the moment around aging and people sort of learning to plan for, as you indicated before, their bodies kind of falling apart and what it means to plan for that financially and housing-wise and socially and how to do that collectively. So I'm thinking a lot about aging. And he wrote a very beautiful book called The Silent Transformations. And these are exactly as we said before, these changes that happen too slowly to notice. So there's sort of revolution and disruption. There are transitions when you're trying to make things change. And then there are the changes that you almost don't notice as they happen. So I always enjoy reading François Jullien's work in that way. I think it's interesting and important. And then, I don't know, my only other recommendation is see lots of good independent international films. I just recently did what I do every year, which is take 2 weeks off work, and then I have a staycation, a low-carbon staycation, and I'm screen-free because I'm looking at one screen. I go to the Sydney Film Festival with my partner, and we spend every day for 10 days watching 4 to 5 films a day. And I just see... I saw a couple of films on Bhutan this year. I saw an amazing film set in the Himalayas. I saw, just an incredible film in Mexico. In terms of just making sure you understand that your way of being in the world is not the only way of being in the world. Go and see films.
But also, this relates to your traveling, right? Because you are not traveling by plane anymore. Did I understood it right?
That's right. That's right. So, yeah, I've given up flying. Like all these choices, it was not done intentionally. So I came back to Australia from being in North America and wasn't flying so much. And then COVID came. And then all of a sudden I realized I hadn't flown for 6 years. And I suddenly thought, I should take that into account now, that if I need to fly again, it needs to be something worth breaking that run for. But of course, every year I don't fly, the question as to what is worth flying again for gets harder and harder and harder. So all of a sudden I've become a Flugscham flying boycotter. So it's a kind of climate action, but as with all virtues, it's a virtue made of necessity, which I think is more interesting than just being kind of moralistic boycott. I think it's kind of interesting to realise that change is always overdetermined. It happens because of systems. It's not just one individual willing to change. So yes, watching films is a nice staycation in one place.
Perfect. Should we go to the future? How do you believe your research will evolve in the near future?
I'm not sure. You've caught me at a moment in which I am very pessimistic about the university. I said before, I have strong demands for the university to be showing leadership in every aspect of society right now. But the universities in Australia are government run, and they're all running out of money, and they're very unsustainable, and they're being managed by a managerial class who have no ambition for the vision of universities. So right now I can't see myself being compatible with this system for too much longer, and maybe I should get out and make way for others. So in that case, I need to spend more time writing some of these arguments down, but I've just got to see if I can get into a position to do that. So yes, I'm rather despondent. I feel like I'm definitely on a losing side at the moment, I'm feeling. And I have the privilege of not fighting, but I'm not choosing not to fight. I'm choosing to take the fight in a different territory.
Thanks a lot for this interview.
Great. Thank you.
If you're going to do some magic, you've got to be responsible, says Cameron. And honestly, not all of us realize the magic behind our work, let alone its impact. It's often hard to predict how things will change when we design something new, not just solving the problem at hand, but everything else that happens around. We need to learn about that more. Sure, we have created a new lamp, a new chair, or a better way to measure waste, but at the end of the day, we are still using resources. What we really need is a society that's less dependent on materials, and it's not just about the stuff we use, but also the services we rely on. Honestly, I could probably do more for the planet by just consuming less rather than working as a designer focused on sustainability. But still, I stick to what I know, designing, thinking ahead, and creating new things. I see the future through change, and it's hard to imagine giving up all the conveniences I'm used to. It's kind of a contradiction. Then there is also the fact that only a few privileged designers, like me, get to choose where we work. It's a luxury to insist on a job that lines up with our values. I've had the chance to get a good education, spend years in university, and live in a wealthy country where I can afford to be unemployed while figuring out my next step. I've taken that opportunity a few times in my life, but not everybody can. So when we see designers working in roles that don't align with their values, we can't judge them. Many are fully aware of the disconnection, but in a lot of places, the job market for designers is pretty limited. Through these talks and what I do on the podcast, I really hope to open up new paths for design. I try to highlight in these conversations how design can contribute to fields like health, education, or migration, areas where design is starting to make its way. By bringing design into these new spaces, I hope it can create more opportunities for designers to find work that's more responsible and better aligns with our values. As always, the music of this podcast is by Antonio Zimmerman. Sound design is by Andy Fecci. This podcast is published with Creative Commons licenses with attributions. This was Diseño y Diáspora. You can follow us on our social media channels in YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter, or X, or visit our website. Remember to recommend us and recommend our books. By the way, did you notice that we published our second book on health and design? All our publications are online and for free from our website. Thanks for tuning in. Till the next episode.